Beneath a Mended Sky. The world outside Haven Books and Brew was a symphony of soft, relentless rain, a rhythmic hush against the broad windows. Inside, a different kind of quiet reigned, one woven from the rustle of turning pages, the gentle hiss of an espresso machine, and the hushed murmurs of a few patrons lost in their own worlds. The air was a comforting blend of roasted coffee beans, vanilla, and the earthy, sweet scent of old paper. Muted lamplight cast a warm, golden glow over stacked shelves brimming with stories, creating pockets of intimate sanctuary. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow, where the hurried pulse of the outside world faded into a distant hum. Eleanor, or Ellie as she preferred, sat tucked away in her usual corner, a worn armchair nestled beside a towering bookcase. Her hands, slender and graceful, cradled a mug of chamomile tea, its steam curling delicately towards her face. Her gaze, often distant and contemplative, was currently fixed on the intricate patterns the rain made as it chased itself down the window pane. She found a strange solace in the predictability of it, the way each drop merged with the next, erasing its brief individuality for the sake of a larger flow. It mirrored, in a way, the quiet dissolution she sometimes felt within herself, a blending into the background of life after years of feeling intensely, almost painfully exposed. Ellie had always been drawn to quiet spaces, but in the past few years, that draw had become a desperate need. A demanding career coupled with a relationship that had slowly, insidiously leached her dry of emotional energy had left her a hollowed-out version of her former self. The breakup hadn't been explosive. It had been a slow, quiet surrender, like a flower wilting from lack of light, not sudden frost. It left no dramatic scars, only in profound exhaustion, a deep-seated wariness that made her wary of anything that threatened to stir her fragile peace. She'd moved to this small coastal town, Seabrook, seeking exactly what it offered: anonymity, the soothing rhythm of the ocean, and the comforting predictability of places like Haven Books and Brew. Here she could simply be. She could read, she could sketch in her well-worn notebook, she could watch the world from a safe distance, feeling the faint stirrings of life without having to actively participate. Her heart, once a vibrant, open thing, was now carefully guarded, a fragile bird tending its bruised wings. Today, however, a faint tremor ran through her usual calm. She'd felt it for the past few days, an almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere, a subtle undercurrent that hinted at change. She attributed it to the changing seasons, the melancholic beauty of autumn deepening its embrace. But as the bell above the door chimed, announcing a new arrival, a different kind of ripple spread through the tranquil space. He stepped in, shaking droplets from the collar of his dark, slightly damp coat. Tall, with a quiet strength in his bearing, he paused just inside the doorway, his eyes sweeping over the room with a gentle curiosity that softened the edges of his otherwise serious face. His hair, a rich, dark brown, was artfully disheveled, and a faint stubble shadowed his jawline, giving him a rugged yet thoughtful appearance. But it was his eyes that held her gaze for a moment longer than she intended, a deep hazel color, framed by dark lashes, carrying a depth that spoke of unspoken stories, and a quiet, almost melancholic understanding. He looked, she thought, as if he carried a private weight, much like her own, but with a different kind of resignation. Liam had arrived in Seabrook just a week ago, a ghost navigating a new landscape. The house he'd rented, a charming but slightly weathered cottage overlooking the bay, felt too large, too silent, without the comforting presence of Sarah. Her name, even in the quiet confines of his mind, still brought a pang, a sharp, familiar ache that had become his constant companion. Losing her, not suddenly and dramatically, but over a slow, agonizing illness, had stripped him bare, leaving him adrift in a sea of grief and profound exhaustion. He'd sold their home, left his architecture firm in the capable hands of his partner, and driven west until the ocean stopped him. He wasn't looking for a new life, not yet. He was simply looking for a place where the noise of his sorrow wouldn't echo so loudly, a place where he could perhaps learn to breathe again without the constant pressure on his chest. Seabrook was proving to be that place. Its unhurried pace, the vast, calming expanse of the Pacific, the unpretentious warmth of its few inhabitants, it was all a balm to his frayed nerves.
He spent his days walking the wind-swept beaches, watching the waves erase his footprints, feeling a strange kinship with the tide's relentless ebb and flow. He knew he needed to find a new routine, something to ground him, but the thought of engaging with anything beyond the most basic necessities felt overwhelming. Today, the persistent drizzle had driven him off the beach and into the small town square. He'd spotted Haven Books and Brew earlier in the week, its inviting glow a beacon against the gray sky. He wasn't a voracious reader, but the idea of a quiet corner, a warm drink, and perhaps a book to lose himself in held an unexpected appeal. As he moved further into the shop, the scent of coffee enveloped him, a comforting embrace. His eye scanned the eclectic collection of books, his mind still a little too numb to truly focus. He wasn't looking for anything specific, just a distraction. Then his gaze drifted to a quiet corner, drawn by a stillness that somehow resonated with his own. She sat there, a woman with soft, understated beauty. Her hair, a shade of warm chestnut, fell loosely around her shoulders, catching the lamplight in subtle streaks. Her profile was delicate, her brow slightly furrowed in thought as she stared out at the rain. There was a quiet intensity about her, a self-contained grace that immediately struck him. He sensed a similar solitude within her, a quiet understanding that didn't demand anything. He found himself pausing, an uncharacteristic flutter of curiosity stirring in his chest. Ellie felt his gaze, a subtle pressure on her skin. She didn't look up immediately, instead taking a slow sip of her tea, the warmth spreading through her. She was acutely aware of him, the way his presence had subtly altered the hushed rhythm of the room. When she finally lifted her eyes, they met his across the comforting clutter of books. It was just a glance, brief and fleeting, yet it felt strangely profound. There was no overt flirtation, no bold invitation. Instead, a silent acknowledgement passed between them, a flicker of recognition for two souls who understood the quiet language of solitude. His eyes, she noticed up close, held a sadness that mirrored her own, a deep-seated weariness that she knew intimately. It was a shared vulnerability, unspoken but deeply felt. A small, almost imperceptible tremor went through her, not of fear, but of something akin to a fragile hope. It was a feeling she hadn't dared to entertain in years. Liam felt it too. Her eyes, a soft, uncertain green, held a vulnerability that disarmed him. There was a quiet pain there, yes, but also a resilient strength, a delicate beauty that tugged at something deep inside him. It wasn't the kind of immediate, fiery attraction that had defined his youth, but a softer, more tender pull, like a quiet melody played on a distant shore. He found himself wanting to stay in that moment, to understand the story behind her gaze. He felt a profound sense of calm emanating from her, a quiet anchor in his storm-tossed world. He tore his gaze away, feeling a flush creep up his neck. He wasn't ready for this, not yet. He wasn't ready for anything like this. He walked to the counter, ordering a black coffee, his voice a little rougher than usual. He tried to focus on the friendly chatter of the barista, but his mind kept drifting back to the woman in the corner, her quiet intensity, the way the lamplight highlighted the subtle curve of her neck. Ellie watched him, a faint blush warming her own cheeks. He had a strong, kind profile, she observed, as he waited for his order. She noticed the way his fingers drummed a soft, impatient rhythm on the counter, a stark contrast to his earlier stillness. He was perhaps more restless than he appeared. A part of her wanted to retreat further into her book, to pull the protective shell of her solitude tighter around her. But another, long-dormant part felt a gentle curiosity unfurl, like a cautious tendril reaching for the sun. He found a table across the room from her, near a window, and settled in, nursing his coffee. He didn't look back at her, but she felt his presence, a gentle hum in the quiet air. She tried to return to her book, but the words blurred, her thoughts now occupied by the unexpected arrival of this quiet stranger. He hadn't said a word to her, beyond the silent acknowledgement, yet he had already shifted something within her carefully constructed world. It wasn't a disruption, not exactly. It was more like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending out ripples that were both unsettling and strangely beautiful. As the rain continued its gentle patter, both Eleanor and Liam remained in their respective corners, wrapped in their thoughts, acutely aware of the other.
The initial spark wasn't a flash, but a slow, smoldering ember, a quiet recognition of shared vulnerability in the heart of a small, ordinary bookstore. A tentative thread, invisible yet palpable, had begun to weave itself between them, hinting at a connection neither of them had been seeking, but perhaps both desperately needed. The quiet world of Haven Books and Brew had just become a little less solitary, a little more charged with unspoken possibility. Part 2. The rain outside persisted, a steady murmur that served as the cafe's natural soundtrack. Eleanor, her tea now lukewarm, traced the rim of her mug with a thoughtful finger. The quiet stranger, Liam, sat across the room, seemingly absorbed in his coffee, yet she felt the subtle magnetic pull of his presence. It was an odd sensation, this awareness, a faint hum beneath her skin that she hadn't felt in years. Her carefully constructed walls, built brick by brick with silent moments and solitary pursuits, felt subtly permeable tonight. She stole another glance. He wasn't looking at her, but there was a quiet intensity to his profile, a slight furrow in his brow that hinted at a deep well of introspection. Liam, for his part, found the simple act of holding his warm mug a small anchor in the shifting sea of his thoughts. He kept his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window, watching the blurred dance of passing cars, but his mind was elsewhere, tethered to the woman in the corner. Her stillness was profound, almost meditative, and it drew him in a way he hadn't anticipated. There was no artifice about her, just a quiet grace that whispered of resilience. He wondered what stories her eyes held, what quiet battles she might have fought. He felt a rare, fleeting desire to simply sit in her presence, without words, without expectations. It was a comfort he hadn't realized he was craving. The gentle whir of the espresso machine ceased, and the barista, a young woman with a kind smile named Chloe, began to wipe down the counter. The evening was winding down, the soft lamplight seeming to deepen as dusk truly settled. Eleanor knew she should leave, return to her own quiet cottage by the sea, but a strange inertia held her captive. She picked up the book she'd been attempting to read, a historical fiction she usually adored, but the words felt flat, unable to capture her attention. Liam, feeling a quiet, restless energy stir within him, decided he couldn't just sit there all evening. He needed another distraction, something to break the comfortable yet unsettling spell that had fallen over him. He stood, a subtle shift in the room's energy, and walked towards the fiction section, ostensibly to browse. His movements were unhurried, almost deliberate, as if he were giving himself time to adjust to the idea of approaching anything new. Eleanor watched him from the corner of her eye, her heart giving a faint, almost imperceptible flutter. He moved with an understated elegance, his height making him seem to glide among the shelves. He stopped a few aisles over from her, his back partially turned, running a hand over the spines of books. She felt a strange mix of apprehension and a gentle, almost hopeful curiosity. He paused in front of a shelf filled with classic literature, his fingers idly tracing the gold lettering on a well-loved copy of Wuthering Heights. He wasn't particularly looking for anything specific, but the act of browsing provided a purpose, a shield against the unexpected vulnerability he felt. He could still feel her gaze, a soft warmth on his back, and he found himself lingering longer than necessary, almost waiting. As if on cue, a sudden soft thud broke the silence. Eleanor, lost in her thoughts, had reached for a book on a higher shelf, only to have a stack of 3 other, heavier volumes tumble from her grasp, landing with a muted thump on the carpeted floor. A faint blush crept up her neck as she quickly bent to retrieve them,
feeling utterly clumsy. Liam turned at the sound, his movements fluid and immediate. He saw her kneeling, her face slightly flushed, gathering the books. Without a second thought, he walked over, bending down smoothly beside her. "Let me help you with those," he said, his voice a low, warm murmur that sent a shiver down her spine. It was the first time she'd heard him speak, and its unexpected gentleness was disarming. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same book, a worn copy of The Great Gatsby. The brief contact was electric, a spark that wasn't just physical, but seemed to hum with unspoken connection. Ellie quickly pulled her hand back, her cheeks growing warmer. "Oh, thank you," she managed, her voice a little softer than she intended. "How clumsy of me." He gathered the remaining books, his movements calm and efficient. He placed them back on the shelf with an easy smile that crinkled the corners of his hazel eyes.
"No trouble at all," he replied, his gaze lingering on her for a moment. "It happens." His tone was reassuring, devoid of judgment, and she found herself relaxing slightly under his quiet presence. "That's a good choice," he said, nodding towards the copy of Gatsby she now held, a classic for a reason. Eleanor looked down at the book, then back up at him. "It is, isn't it? Though I find it's a book you appreciate differently at different stages of life. More melancholy now, perhaps." She hadn't meant to share such a personal observation, but the words had simply spilled out, drawn by the unexpected ease of his presence. He nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I understand what you mean. Some stories gain layers, don't they? Like old photographs, fading but gaining depth with time." His words resonated deeply with her, striking a chord of shared experience. "I'm Eleanor, by the way," she offered, extending a hesitant hand. He took it, his grip warm and firm, but gentle. "Liam," he replied, his gaze steady and kind. "It's nice to finally have a name to the quiet corner." A small smile played on his lips, hinting at the awareness that had passed between them earlier. A faint laugh escaped her, a sound she hadn't realized she was capable of in this setting. "And you to the mysterious new arrival." They stood there for a moment, hands still clasped, a silent understanding passing between them. The air around them felt charged, not with tension, but with a fragile, nascent connection. It was a sensation both exhilarating and terrifying for Ellie, who had grown so accustomed to her solitude. Liam was the first to release her hand, a subtle shift that broke the spell. "Are you a regular here, Eleanor?" he asked, gesturing vaguely around the cozy cafe. "Most evenings," she confirmed, a faint flush still on her cheeks. "It's my sanctuary, the perfect place to unwind after life." She bit her lip, regretting the slight overshare, but his expression remained empathetic. "I can see why," he said, his eyes sweeping over the warm, inviting space. "I just moved to Seabrook a week ago, trying to find my own anchor." He offered the last part almost as an aside, a quiet admission of his own searching. Eleanor felt a pang of recognition. Trying to find my own anchor. It was exactly what she had been doing for months. "Welcome to Seabrook," she said softly, a genuine warmth in her voice. "It's a good place for that." Slow and steady. "It seems to be," Liam agreed, a faint smile gracing his lips. "I've been spending a lot of time by the ocean. There's something very grounding about it." "There is," she murmured, thinking of her own ritualistic walks along the shore, the way it always comes back, no matter what. A comfortable silence fell between them, not awkward, but filled with unspoken understanding. The rain continued its soft drumming against the windows, and the scent of coffee and old books seemed to deepen, wrapping them in a cozy cocoon. They stood amidst the quiet shelves, two solitary figures who had, by chance, found a brief, gentle reprieve in each other's unexpected presence. Chloe, the barista, called out softly, "Last call for drinks, folks, closing up in 15. The announcement broke their quiet reverie. "Oh," Eleanor said, a slight regret in her voice. "Time flies, doesn't it?" Liam nodded. "It does. Well, it was a pleasure to meet you, Eleanor." He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps I'll see you here again?" His tone was hopeful, but not demanding, a soft invitation. Eleanor felt a surprising lightness in her chest. A part of her, the guarded part, wanted to retreat, to say a non-committal goodbye and disappear back into her safe routine. But another, smaller, braver part found itself answering, "I hope so, Liam. I usually get here around this time." She gave him a small, genuine smile. He returned her smile, a warmth radiating from his eyes that reached her heart. Good to know. As they both began to gather their things, the quiet cafe felt different, subtly altered by their brief, gentle exchange. Eleanor picked up her almost empty mug, a lingering warmth seeping into her hands. The book, The Great Gatsby, now felt like a tangible link to their conversation. She walked towards the counter to pay, feeling a lightness in her step that hadn't been there earlier. Liam watched her go, a quiet sense of wonder settling over him. He hadn't expected to feel anything like this, not today, not for a long time. The faint scent of her, something subtle and clean, like rain and wildflowers, still lingered in the air where she'd been. Her quiet strength, her subtle melancholy, her genuine smile, they had all touched something deep within him, stirring a part of his soul he thought had gone dormant. He paid for his coffee, his mind replaying their brief conversation, the brush of their hands.
Walking out into the still, falling rain, the world felt a little less muted, a little less gray. The silence of his cottage wouldn't be quite as empty tonight, he realized. He had a name to carry with him, a quiet presence to recall. And Eleanor, too, found that the familiar comfort of her home now held a faint echo of Liam's gentle voice, a quiet expectation she hadn't dared to name. The evening had offered not a dramatic turning point, but a soft, almost imperceptible shift, a tiny crack in the carefully constructed walls around their hearts, letting in just a sliver of unexpected light. They had met, they had spoken, and in that small exchange, a fragile seed of connection had been planted, waiting patiently for the soft rain of time to coax it into bloom. The gentle rhythm of the rain had given way to the soft whisper of the sea breeze, but the memory of Liam's quiet presence lingered in Eleanor's mind like the scent of old paper and freshly brewed coffee. Back in her cottage, the familiar quiet felt different, less encompassing, almost as if a faint echo of his voice still resonated in the air. She found herself replaying their brief exchange, the brush of their hands, the unexpected ease of their conversation. More melancholy now, perhaps, she had said of Gatsby, and he had understood, instantly, intuitively. It was a rare and precious thing to be truly seen, even in such a fleeting moment. A tender vulnerability stirred within her, a sensation both longed for and deeply feared. Her heart, so carefully guarded, felt a faint, almost imperceptible tremor, like a leaf unfurling after a long winter. Liam, too, found his thoughts returning to Eleanor as he settled into the quiet solitude of his rented cottage. He'd walked the beach earlier, the vast expanse of the ocean mirroring the emptiness he often felt, but tonight, a new image superimposed itself over the waves, her soft, uncertain smile, the way her hair caught the lamplight, the quiet depth in her green eyes. He hadn't realized how starved he was for genuine connection until that brief encounter. Sarah, his late wife, had been the center of his world, and after her passing, the idea of forging new bonds, especially romantic ones, had felt like a betrayal, or worse, an impossibility. Yet with Eleanor, there was no pressure, no expectation, just a gentle recognition, a shared stillness that felt profoundly comforting. He found himself looking forward to tomorrow evening, a faint, unfamiliar warmth blossoming in his chest. The next evening, Eleanor arrived at Haven Books and Brew a little earlier than usual, a conscious, yet unacknowledged, deviation from her routine. She chose her usual armchair, but her gaze kept drifting towards the door, a subtle tension humming beneath her calm exterior. She told herself it was simply curiosity, a mild interest in a new face in her familiar sanctuary, but the faint flutter in her stomach told a different story. Just as the clock chimed 6,
The bell above the door announced his arrival. Liam stepped in, his familiar dark coat slung over his arm, his eyes immediately finding her. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, and Eleanor felt an answering warmth spread through her. He walked to the counter, ordered his coffee, and then, instead of finding his previous table across the room, he walked directly towards her. "Good evening, Eleanor," he said, his voice a soft melody that settled around her. He gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "May I?" "Please," she replied, her voice a little breathy. Her heart beat a soft tattoo against her ribs. He settled into the chair, the slight creak of the wood the only sound between them for a moment. He took a sip of his coffee, his gaze gentle and assessing. "How was your day?" he asked, his tone indicating genuine interest. Eleanor found herself telling him about a frustrating encounter with a difficult client in her freelance graphic design work, a minor annoyance she usually dismissed without much thought. But with Liam, she found herself articulating the small frustrations, and he listened, truly listened, his head slightly tilted, his eyes never leaving hers. "That sounds draining," he said softly when she finished. "It's hard when creativity is stifled by rigid expectations." She felt a rush of gratitude. He understood. "It is," she agreed. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just pushing pixels around, not creating anything meaningful." "I know that feeling," Liam confessed, a wistful note in his voice. "Architecture can be like that. The passion for design, for bringing beauty into the world, sometimes gets lost in the logistics, the budgets, the endless meetings." He paused, a faraway look in his eyes. "I used to love the process, the challenge of shaping space, but lately," he trailed off, a subtle shadow passing over his face.
Eleanor didn't press, sensing the unspoken weight in his words. Instead, she offered, "Perhaps it's just a season. Sometimes we need to step away to remember what we loved." He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his hazel eyes. "Perhaps," he mused, a soft, thoughtful smile returning. "You are a designer, then?" They talked for nearly an hour that evening, their conversation flowing gently between their shared professional frustrations, the quiet charm of Seabrook, and the comfort of the cafe itself. They didn't delve into deep personal histories, but through their shared observations and quiet empathy, they began to paint faint outlines of the people they were beneath the surface. Eleanor learned he was an architect, and the slight sadness that clung to him wasn't just a mood, but something deeper, more profound. He learned that her quiet demeanor masked a thoughtful, artistic soul, sensitive to the nuances of life. Over the next few days, their encounters at Haven Books and Brew became a quiet ritual. Eleanor would arrive, finding him either already there, a book open on the table, but his gaze often drifting, or he would arrive shortly after, his eyes seeking her out with a gentle anticipation that made her heart ache with a bittersweet tenderness. They didn't always talk much. Sometimes they would simply sit, each engrossed in their own thoughts or books, the comfortable silence between them a testament to a burgeoning trust. One evening, Liam saw her sketching intently in a small notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. He watched her for a while, captivated by the delicate movements of her hand. Finally, he leaned forward slightly. "What are you drawing, if you don't mind me asking?" Eleanor startled, a faint blush rising to her cheeks. She was always self-conscious about her art. "Oh, just the light, the way it falls on the spines of the books over there." She turned the notebook slightly so he could see. It was a charcoal sketch, soft and atmospheric, capturing the interplay of shadow and glow on the worn leather and paper, imbued with a quiet beauty. "That's beautiful, Eleanor," he said, his voice genuinely impressed. "You have a real gift for capturing mood. I can almost feel the quiet of this place in your lines." Her blush deepened, but a warmth spread through her, a rare feeling of being truly seen and appreciated for something she held dear. "Thank you," she whispered, her gaze meeting his, a newfound vulnerability shining in her eyes. "It's just a hobby, a way to ground myself." "It's more than a hobby," Liam insisted gently. "It's a way of seeing, a way of interpreting the world." He paused,
then said, "I used to sketch too, for my designs, but it's been a long time." A familiar shadow flickered in his eyes, a brief, haunting reflection of his unspoken past. Eleanor didn't push. Instead, she just nodded, her eyes conveying an understanding that transcended words. In that shared moment of quiet, they acknowledged the places within themselves that were still raw, still healing. Another evening, Liam walked up to her table with 2 mugs in his hands, her usual chamomile tea and his black coffee. "Thought you might be ready for a refill," he offered, a soft smile gracing his lips. Eleanor looked up, surprised and touched. "Oh, Liam, you didn't have to." "It's no trouble," he said, placing the warm mug in front of her. "Consider it a small payment for the peaceful company." Their fingers brushed as she took the mug, and the familiar spark, softer this time, passed between them. It was a simple gesture, yet it spoke volumes, weaving another delicate thread into the tapestry of their connection. They talked that night about their favorite books, the ones that had shaped them, the stories they returned to again and again. Eleanor confessed her enduring love for classic poetry, for the way words could distill complex emotions into poignant verses. Liam admitted a fondness for historical biographies, for the weight of human experience contained within real lives. "There's something comforting in knowing that others have faced immense challenges and found their way through," he mused, swirling his coffee. "And that beauty can be found even in sorrow," Eleanor added, her gaze distant for a moment, "that the human spirit endures." Their eyes met, holding a shared understanding that went deeper than words. Each recognized in the other a similar journey, a path marked by loss and the quiet struggle to find meaning again. They weren't strangers anymore, not truly. They were 2 souls, carefully re-emerging from their cocoons of solitude, finding a fragile solace in the unexpected warmth of each other's presence. As the weeks turned, their quiet conversations deepened, touching on themes of resilience, the beauty of the ordinary, and the gentle art of simply being. They still avoided the raw wounds of their pasts, the direct causes of their weariness, but they circled them, hinting at their existence through shared observations and empathetic silences. Each day, Eleanor found herself anticipating their evening ritual, the faint flutter in her heart growing a little stronger, a little less fearful. Liam, too, felt a quiet lightness unfurl within him, a sense of gentle hope he hadn't believed possible. One particularly crisp evening, as the first hint of autumn chill nipped at the air, they were the last ones in the cafe, Chloe having already begun her closing routine. Liam looked at Eleanor, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Eleanor," he began, his voice soft, Would you ever consider joining me for a walk along the beach sometime, before our evening ritual here?" Eleanor's heart gave a sudden, hopeful leap. A walk outside the cafe, a step beyond their quiet sanctuary. It felt like a significant invitation, a gentle pushing of their boundaries. Her initial instinct, ingrained over years of self-preservation, was to hesitate, to find an excuse. But then she looked into his kind, expectant eyes, seeing the quiet hope reflected there, and a different answer formed on her lips. "I'd like that very much, Liam," she said, her voice a soft whisper that felt incredibly brave. "I'd like that a lot." A genuine, radiant smile spread across Liam's face, transforming his features, making him look years younger, lighter. Eleanor felt her own heart respond, a surge of warmth flowing through her. It wasn't a grand declaration or a dramatic step, but in the quiet, healing world they were building, it felt like a monumental leap, a fragile bridge stretching towards a shared horizon. The romantic tension wasn't a burning fire, but a gentle, steady glow, promising warmth and light in the quiet journey ahead. She chose a simple, warm sweater, feeling a nervous flutter in her stomach that was both unfamiliar and strangely welcome. Liam arrived at the designated meeting spot by the boardwalk entrance a few minutes early, his heart beating a quiet, steady rhythm. He watched the waves, feeling the cool spray on his face, a sense of anticipation building within him. He hadn't felt this gentle excitement in years. The prospect of sharing the ocean, his newfound sanctuary, with Eleanor felt profoundly right. Her acceptance of his invitation had sparked a fragile hope within him, a belief that perhaps, just perhaps, the numbness he'd carried for so long was beginning to thaw. When Eleanor spotted him, standing silhouetted against the vast expanse of the sea, a serene calm settled over her. He turned as she approached, his hazel eyes meeting hers with a warmth that instantly put her at ease. "Hello, Liam," she said, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "Eleanor," he replied, his voice a soft murmur carried by the breeze. "Perfect day for a walk, isn't it?" They fell into a comfortable stride, side by side, the rhythmic crash of the waves providing a soothing backdrop to their unspoken thoughts. The air was crisp, carrying the salty tang of the sea, and the gulls cried overhead, their calls echoing the wild beauty of the coast. For a while, they walked in companionable silence, each lost in the gentle sensory immersion of the moment, yet acutely aware of the other's presence. Eleanor found herself noticing the small things about Liam, the way his dark hair ruffled in the breeze, the quiet strength of his profile, the gentle rhythm of his breath. She felt an unexpected sense of peace walking beside him, as if a missing piece of her own quiet landscape had subtly fallen into place. Liam, meanwhile, was captivated by Eleanor's quiet grace. She moved with an easy elegance, her gaze often drifting to the horizon, a thoughtful expression on her face. He wondered what she was thinking, what stories the vast ocean whispered to her. He found himself wanting to protect that quiet, contemplative spirit, to nurture the fragile hope he saw beginning to stir in her eyes. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice barely above the sound of the waves. "I found a lot of peace out here," he confessed, gesturing towards the sweeping expanse of the sea. After a difficult time. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes soft with understanding.
"Me too," she admitted, her voice equally low. "There's a kind of healing in its constancy, isn't there? The way it reminds you that life keeps going, even when you feel utterly still." He nodded, a faint, sad smile playing on his lips. "Exactly. It puts things into perspective. The big, overwhelming things, they become smaller against the backdrop of eternity." He paused, then continued, his voice taking on a slightly more introspective tone. "My wife, Sarah, she loved the ocean. We always planned to retire near the coast." The words, heavy with unspoken grief, hung in the air between them. It was the first time he had spoken of her, and the raw vulnerability in his voice tightened Eleanor's chest. Eleanor reached out, her hand hovering for a moment, then gently touching his arm. It was a gesture of pure, unthinking empathy, a silent offering of comfort. "I'm so sorry, Liam," she murmured, her voice filled with genuine compassion. "That's an immense loss." He looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears, but also with a profound gratitude for her understanding. "It was," he whispered, his gaze drifting back to the waves. "A long illness, the kind that drains everything from you, slowly, relentlessly. And then when it finally ends, you're just empty, adrift." Eleanor squeezed his arm gently. "I understand," she said, her own voice thick with emotion. "Not the same, of course, but the feeling of being emptied out, of losing something so profoundly that you wonder if you'll ever feel whole again, I know that." She hesitated, then took a quiet breath. I was in a relationship for many years that slowly, quietly stripped me of who I was. Not dramatic, no big fights, just a gradual erosion of my spirit, my joy. When it finally ended, I felt like a ghost, hollowed out and utterly exhausted. That's why I came here, to Seabrook, to find myself again, piece by quiet piece. They stopped walking, standing shoulder to shoulder at the edge of the water, the waves washing over their feet. The raw confessions, offered in the vast open space of the beach, felt less daunting, more natural. In sharing their wounds, a deeper, more profound connection was forged, a bond woven from shared pain and quiet resilience. Liam turned to her, his gaze intense, filled with a newfound understanding. A quiet erosion, he repeated, the words resonating deeply with him. That's a painful kind of loss too, Eleanor. To lose yourself, piece by piece.
It takes immense courage to even acknowledge that, let alone to try and rebuild. It does, she agreed, meeting his gaze. And to trust again, to open up, that's the scariest part. I know, he murmured, his thumb gently stroking her arm where his hand still rested. The touch was comforting, reassuring, a silent promise of understanding. I thought I wouldn't ever be able to feel anything again, beyond the ache. But then I met you, and your quiet presence, your understanding, it's like a soft rain on parched earth. Eleanor felt a wave of emotion wash over her, gratitude, tenderness, a fragile hope that was almost overwhelming. To hear him articulate what she had been feeling, the gentle thawing, the slow returning of color to her world, was profoundly moving. And you, Liam, she confessed, her voice barely audible, you've brought a quiet light back into my evenings. I didn't realize how accustomed I'd become to the dark until you arrived. They stood there for a long moment, the world outside them fading into a blur, their connection the only vibrant reality. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in fiery hues, casting long shadows across the sand. The air grew cooler, but a warmth blossomed between them, a tender, burgeoning affection that felt both new and ancient. Thank you for telling me, Eleanor, Liam said softly, his voice thick with emotion. It means a lot that you trusted me with that. Thank you for sharing your story too, Liam, she replied, looking into his eyes, which now held a deeper vulnerability, a gentle plea for connection. It feels important, somehow, to know. They resumed their walk, but the dynamic had subtly shifted. Their conversation was no longer light and observational, but imbued with the weight of shared experience, the fragile intimacy of revealed wounds. They talked about the process of healing, the small, almost imperceptible steps forward, the moments of joy that sometimes broke through the lingering sorrow. As they walked towards the path leading back to town, the stars began to prickle through the fading twilight. Liam stopped, turning to face her. Eleanor, he began, his voice a little shaky, I know we're taking things slowly, and that's good, but I feel something with you, something I haven't felt in a very long time, a quiet hope. He took her hands in his gaze steady and sincere. Would you consider having dinner with me sometime? Not here in the cafe, a proper dinner. Eleanor's heart soared. It was a clear step forward, a gentle invitation to explore the possibility of a connection beyond the sanctuary of the bookstore. The fear was still there, a faint tremor, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of anticipation, a longing for what might be. She looked at their clasped hands, then up at his kind, earnest face. Yes, Liam, she said, her voice soft but firm. I would like that very much. A wave broke on the shore, its sound like a sigh of contentment. Liam's smile returned, wider and more genuine than she had seen it before, a true reflection of the joy shimmering in his eyes. He squeezed her hands gently, then released one to softly cup her cheek. His thumb stroked her skin, a feather-light touch that sent shivers down her spine. The gesture was tender, hesitant, yet filled with an unspoken promise. Good,
he murmured, his gaze holding hers. The romantic tension was no longer a distant hum, but a warm, palpable current flowing between them, a silent acknowledgement of the beautiful, uncertain path they were beginning to walk together, beneath the vast, mended sky. The evening, begun with a walk on the beach, ended with the promise of a future, delicately held in the gentle touch of a hand, and the quiet hope in two hearts slowly beginning to heal. Part 5. The invitation for dinner, spoken under the vast, star-prickled sky, had solidified their connection, moving it from the realm of gentle acquaintance to something more tender and intentional. Eleanor spent the next few days with a quiet lightness in her step, an almost forgotten hum beneath the surface of her calm demeanor. She chose a small, cozy restaurant in Seabrook, known for its intimate atmosphere and fresh local seafood. The evening air was crisp, carrying the promise of late autumn, and as she dressed, she felt a delicate balance of nerves and anticipation. Liam was already there when she arrived, standing by a window table, gazing out at the twinkling lights of the harbor. He turned as she approached, his eyes lighting up with that familiar, gentle warmth that had become so comforting to her. He wore a simple, dark sweater that enhanced the thoughtful depth in his eyes. "Eleanor," he greeted, his smile soft and genuine. He pulled out her chair with an easy grace. "You look lovely." "Thank you, Liam," she replied, a blush rising to her cheeks. "You too."
The restaurant was softly lit, with the low murmur of conversation and the clinking of silverware creating a pleasant backdrop. They ordered their food, and the conversation flowed easily, a natural continuation of their beach walk confessions. They talked about their lives before Seabrook, not in a way that dwelled on the pain, but in a way that acknowledged the paths that had led them to this quiet coastal town. Eleanor spoke more about her past relationship, the slow, insidious erosion of her confidence and spirit. "It wasn't abusive in any overt way," she explained, her voice quiet. "But it was a relationship where I always felt slightly less, slightly smaller. My creativity was dismissed, my feelings were minimized. By the end, I didn't even recognize myself. I had forgotten how to laugh freely, how to simply be." She looked up, her gaze meeting his, a faint vulnerability in her eyes. Coming here was about finding those pieces again, relearning joy. Liam listened with unwavering attention, his hand resting gently on the table, almost as if he were silently offering a grounding presence. "That kind of loss of self is incredibly profound," he said softly, his voice filled with empathy. "It's like a quiet disappearance, and it takes immense courage to reclaim yourself." He paused, then continued. "My own loss was more abrupt in its finality, but the lead-up was also a slow disappearance. Watching Sarah fade, piece by piece, as the illness took hold. The vibrant woman I married diminished until only her spirit remained, and then even that. It changes you. It makes you question everything." His voice was tinged with a familiar sorrow, but there was also a newfound resilience in his tone, a quiet acceptance that hadn't been there before. Eleanor reached across the table, her fingers gently touching his. "It does," she agreed, her touch a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey through the landscape of grief. "But perhaps it also makes us appreciate the quiet joys, the small moments of connection, even more." He turned his hand, gently intertwining their fingers. "Perhaps," he murmured, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "I think you're right." The dinner was a tapestry of shared stories, quiet silences, and the growing warmth between them. They discovered a mutual love for old films, a shared appreciation for the melancholic beauty of jazz music, and a quiet fascination with the migratory patterns of birds along the coast. It wasn't about grand gestures, but the quiet intimacy of two souls slowly, carefully revealing their authentic selves to each other. Over the next few weeks, their connection deepened organically, like roots finding purchase in fertile soil. The cafe remained their cherished sanctuary, but their world expanded.
They took more walks along the beach, often lingering until the stars emerged, sharing observations about the tide, the distant lights of fishing boats, or simply enjoying the profound comfort of shared silence. They discovered a small, hidden cove, accessible only at low tide, which quickly became their spot, a private stretch of sand where they could speak freely or simply be without the subtle pressures of the outside world. Liam started sketching again, tentatively at first, sitting beside Eleanor at the cafe, their notebooks open. He found himself drawing the intricate details of old buildings, the rugged lines of the coastline, and sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, faint, delicate profiles that resembled her. Eleanor, in turn, found a new vibrancy in her own work, drawing inspiration from the interplay of light and shadow, the resilience of nature, and the quiet strength she saw in Liam. She even started to incorporate more color into her art, a reflection of the subtle brightening of her inner world. One particularly blustery afternoon, they found themselves sheltering in Liam's cottage after a long walk on the beach, the wind howling softly around the eaves. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. They sat on the worn, comfortable sofa, wrapped in blankets, sipping hot cider. "I haven't felt this peaceful in so long," Liam confessed, his voice a low rumble. He looked at Eleanor, his hazel eyes filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "For years, my world was just a muted gray. I didn't think color would ever come back. But with you, Eleanor, it's like the world is slowly re-emerging." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence, the steady beat of his heart. "It's the same for me, Liam," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought I was content in my quiet solitude, but I didn't realize how much of me was still holding its breath. You make me feel safe enough to breathe again, to feel." He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her gently closer.
The touch was comforting, protective, imbued with a quiet affection that resonated deeply within her. They sat there for a long time, simply existing in the shared space, the fire crackling, the wind whispering outside, the silence between them a testament to their profound connection. They talked about the future, not in terms of grand plans or immediate commitments, but in the gentle, open-ended way that suited their healing hearts. They understood that healing was a journey, not a destination, and that love, when it emerged from such profound loss, required patience, understanding, and a willingness to simply be present. "I'm not sure what comes next exactly," Liam said one evening, as they watched the sunset from their hidden cove, the sky ablaze with vibrant hues. "But I know I want to figure it out with you, Eleanor, whatever it is." Eleanor turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears of gratitude and hope. "Me too, Liam," she affirmed, her voice a soft, heartfelt whisper. "With you." There was no sudden, dramatic declaration, no passionate kiss under a dramatic sky. Instead, he simply reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb stroking his skin. His gaze held hers, a universe of shared understanding, quiet hope, and profound affection passing between them. He leaned in slowly, giving her all the time in the world to respond. Eleanor, without hesitation, leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed as their lips met. It was a soft kiss, tender and slow, tasting of salt air and shared vulnerability. It was a kiss of quiet reassurance, of gentle promise, of two mended souls finding solace and strength in each other. It was not a kiss that erased their pasts, but one that embraced them, acknowledging the scars while celebrating the nascent joy of their present. Their journey was far from over. The echoes of their past losses would always be a part of them, woven into the fabric of their beings. But now, they were no longer walking alone.
They had found each other in a quiet corner of the world, two emotionally wounded individuals who, through gentle conversations, shared silences, and profound understanding, had begun to heal. Eleanor found her laughter returning, light and free, and her art blossomed with newfound confidence.
Liam, in turn, rediscovered his passion for design, sketching new ideas with a renewed sense of purpose. His grief, no longer a suffocating blanket, but a gentle reminder of the love he had carried, now softened by the love he was building. One late afternoon, months after their first meeting, they sat in their usual corner at Haven Books and Brew, the familiar scent of coffee and old paper wrapping around them. Eleanor was sketching, Liam was reading, but every now and then their eyes would meet across the table, a soft, understanding smile passing between them. The world outside might rush and roar, but in their quiet sanctuary, beneath a mended sky, Eleanor and Liam had found their peace, their comfort, and a quiet, enduring hope, together. Their story was not ending, but simply unfurling into a beautiful, unwritten future, hand in hand, heart to heart.